Thank you very much, Lindsay. It's a nice introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's really an honor to make the Arkansas Visionary List and to come back home and talk a little bit about some of the work I've been doing at Yelp and in Silicon Valley. I've been with Yelp now for about 6 years, and it was. My trajectory there was kind of weird. I was working for General Clark, as Lindsay said, and he had endorsed Hillary Clinton. We were working on his autobiography. He endorsed Hillary. I was sort of this closet Obama guy living in Arkansas, which I guess I'm not supposed to in the Clinton school. I love Bill Clinton, love Hillary Clinton, but at the time I was sort of rooting for Obama quietly. And I said, she's probably going to get the nomination, so I can always come back and work for General Clark. And I love the politics and work for him, but I'd always sort of had this romantic ideal of working in a company where, there's dogs running around the office and the CEO is 25 and is wearing a T-shirt and there are kegs and has a massive amount of funding, but maybe not a super clear vision of how they're going to get to profitability. This idea of an internet startup, and so one day I just sort of put all my stuff in my car and drove to San Francisco, and I applied for a low-level gig at Yelp, and that was about 6 years ago. I was employee number 100. It's now a 2,000-person global company. We've got over 100 million people that use the site every month. Has anybody never heard of Yelp? Great. Well, it used to be whenever you ask Arkansas audiences, has anybody never heard of Yelp? Basically, every hand would go up. But it's getting better. It's definitely getting some traction, and for those of you that aren't super familiar with it, basically it's a website where people read and write reviews about local businesses, and anything from car mechanics to salons to boutiques, restaurants are one of the most popular channels that people write reviews on, and so I worn a variety of hats at the company, but for the last couple of years, I've served as the Government Affairs and Public Policy Director. And it's in this role that I've encountered the open data movement, which is what I'm supposed to talk about today. So, the open data, before I dive in, I first want to talk about sort of how, what open data is and why it's important. I'm going to talk about some examples of how open data is being used in other sectors, and then I'm going to talk about sort of how Yelp got involved in open data, and then finally explore some areas where I think Arkansas could benefit from open data. So first, what is open data? Open data is the idea that certain data should be freely available to everyone to use and republish as they wish without restrictions from copyright, patents, or other mechanisms of control. So this most commonly, for the open data movement, is thought of in the context of government. And this is something that's very exciting because governments create just tons of data and information. Any type of interaction that we have with the government is somehow logged. If you get a traffic ticket, if a crime is committed, if a restaurant is inspected, if a corporation makes a filing with the SEC, data is somehow created. And so up until recently, before sort of the cloud computing and the internet became really ubiquitous, this data wasn't necessarily easily accessible by citizens. So this idea that governments, it's really in its infancy, but you're starting to see more of governments basically taking information that they are generating just by virtue of being these giant, clunky bureaucratic entities that definitionally are creating a lot of data, taking that stuff and putting it in places, not only putting it online, but putting it in a way that, online in a way that makes sense and makes it easily digestible for third parties to come in and use. That's really what the core of what open data is. And so I think it's personally very exciting because as we live in a democracy, we have a stake in government. We are in some ways indirectly, we are the government. And so open data to me represents a way for governments to give back to taxpayers information that they are subsidizing, that they are creating. It belongs to the taxpayers and the citizens, so let's give it back to them. So what does that literally mean? So ideally, when you're talking about open data, you're referring to something that is machine readable. So it's very easy to take information from one server and put it onto a different server or computer, and it's structured. So it's not just some random county clerk's idea of what an Excel file should look like. It's, the first name is going to live in column A, last name is going to live in column B, and so on. There's some type of structure or standard format to it. Importantly, it's not sort of a scan of a government document in the form of an image file. That's, as a principle in open data, not very useful. It's nice that that type of data often lives online, and governments are sort of moving that direction to share raw documents like that. But ultimately, if you want to do some type of third-party analysis, that's not very helpful. It's easy to find. It's easy to download. You have it available in a number of formats. And it's high value, so you can search within the document. The information isn't outdated, and the information that you're getting has some base level of quality to it. It's not just full of duplicates or erroneous information. The goal of open data is, the open data movement is to increase public access to high-value machine-readable data sets generated by local, state, and federal governments. And open data increases the ability of the public to easily find, download, and use these data sets that are held by governments. Public participation and collaboration is key, because the success of open data enables the public to participate in government by providing downloadable data sets to build applications, conduct analysis, and perform research. This is a screenshot of the New York City open data portal that you can get on and search, and it provides just a number of different, really hundreds, if not thousands, of data sets that citizens, app developers, and others can get on and use. And here it looks like the most popular one that's being downloaded recently is the Wi-Fi hotspot locations that the city provides, and 311 service requests from 2010 to present. So just to take the 311 example, I mean, that's 311 is a service that allows citizens to report things like, hey, somebody's had an illegal dumping, they're putting the trash onto the sidewalk, we have graffiti in this particular area. And so to open that and give the public access allows these third-party entities to come in and essentially help the government analyze it, and even creates new markets in that sense. So why is this important? Well, the primary goal of the open data movement is to improve access to government data and expand creative use of those data beyond the walls of government by encouraging innovative ideas, such as web applications or iPhone apps. And the open data movement strives to make government more transparent and promote openness in government. This openness strengthens our democracy, and it promotes efficiency and effectiveness in government. And it has implications in virtually every area that government touches, whether it's finance, disaster recovery, crime prevention, holding elected office accountable. Every part of government really has the potential to be transformed by open data. So I'm going to sort of walk through a couple examples of sort of successes in open data. And again, this is sort of in its infancy right now. One of the most exciting things happening right now at the federal government level is data.gov, which was created as part of an executive order from President Obama in December '09 that mandates federal agencies and agencies that sort of fall under the executive branch to share interesting data set, to take stuff that's living on their servers and put it into these formats online so citizens can make use of it. This one that they're promoting on their site currently has baby names by state since 1910. There's a huge amount of buzz and discussion about Health and Human Services release of data and it was a big part of the seminal timepiece many months ago about sort of the dysfunction in the American healthcare system. And what they did is they looked at the various data sets and saw that Hospital A was charging Medicare X amount, and Hospital B was charging Medicare 10x that amount, and just the type of disparity that folks are able to identify because this data is out in the open. So you can look forward to seeing this type of work expand, and developers come in and build off of this and create new value for the data. Another example from across the pond is the United Kingdom recently, as part of an open data mandate, released some of their National Health Service information. And because they have sort of socialized medicine, they have deeper data about how pharmaceuticals are distributed, what's being used for specific instances in patients. And within 6 weeks of releasing the data, a third-party group came in and was able to identify about $300 million worth of inefficiency per year in their health budgets. And so this has very significant implications, and it allows them to make appropriate reforms. And then finally, one of my favorites is a project that takes data sets, machine-readable data sets from the Securities and Exchange Commission and its equivalent counterparts in various countries around the world to map corporate relationships and subsidiaries. So here, and one of the cool kind of aspects of open data is that it allows people and developers and designers to build incredible visualizations to help us really understand government information in a way that what hasn't been understood before. This particular example is Goldman Sachs relationship mapping, and shows the various holdings and subsidiaries. The size of the particular geographic entity is governed by the quantity of subsidiaries and essentially tax, where they're able to sort of hide tax dollars. And so you have, in this map, the Cayman Islands is almost as large as the United States in terms of the amount of subsidiaries there. So it really helps, a picture is sort of worth 1,000 words in a lot of these cases. And so I talked a little bit about sort of third parties and how they've used open data. How did I sort of begin to become exposed to open data? And that sort of brings me back to Yelp. So Yelp, as we all know, is a review website. It's where people write reviews about their favorite businesses and not so favorite businesses. And restaurants are obviously a very important aspect, a very important category on Yelp. When people are on Yelp and doing a search for barbecue near Little Rock, they're not doing that for fun. They're trying to figure out where they're going to spend their money, where they're going to dine for lunch. And so as a business, we have to think about what are ways that we can augment that user experience with third-party information. So for example, we have partnerships with OpenTable. If you are a restaurant that has a relationship with OpenTable and you find that particular business on Yelp, you can book it right there, and there's basically a button where you can do the entire OpenTable experience and make the reservation right there on Yelp.com. And that's what I talk about when I mean sort of pulling in third-party channels, APIs, and information to augment and make the experience helpful. So about this time last year, we were thinking about, are there any government data sets out there that could really improve our experience? And we kept arriving back at restaurant inspection scores and hygiene scores, and how in virtually every municipality and county within the United States, if you are a food service entity, you have to at some point, whether it's once a year, a few times a year, allow health inspectors from the city or state or county to come in, inspect your facility, create reports. And we thought, gosh, that would be a neat project to kind of bring this type of stuff online. So through a collaboration with the cities of New York and San Francisco, basically sitting down with those technologists and learning about sort of how they bring that data online, what type of data is included in those sets, we worked to develop an open data standard called LIVES. And LIVES is really a backronym. It used to be called OHIS, Open Health Inspection Score, and that was the name of it. The engineers named it, and I said, no, guys, you got to give it sort of a catchy, we got to be able to market this to various cities. So we came up with LIVES, which stands for Local Inspector Value Entry Specification. And what LIVES is basically it's instructions to, effectively are instructions to cities. It's Yelp saying, hey, if you want your citizens' information, this restaurant inspection data, to live on Yelp and presumably have a much more meaningful context for your citizens, you need to put, the inspection date in this column, the name of the restaurant in this column, what the inspection outcome was in this column, all these various data, you have to sort of arrange it this way. So what's called is an open data specification. So they can't just sort of send us a zip file with a bunch of bunch of JPEGs of them scanning their files that they've opened a drawer and dusted it off. They have to provide it in this very structured way. And we launched it in January with San Francisco. So the San Francisco is sort of a stereotypically, if you're a tech company that's trying to work with the government, San Francisco is pretty much always excited to be a partner. They are stereotypically very tech friendly. We wanted this to just go beyond sort of a San Francisco experiment and really turn this into a national project. And when we sort of developed it, a big part of our inspiration was Los Angeles County, a study that came out of Los Angeles County in the late 90s, when Los Angeles County required, in 1997, they required the restaurant inspection scores to be displayed on the storefront. So in 97, they said, you know what, guys, restaurant owners, you can't just throw this into a drawer anymore. You have to actually put the letter grade up on a storefront. Within 2 years of that mandate, there was a 13% reduction in hospitalization due to foodborne illness, and in 2 years there was a 90% increase, or within 2 years, 90% of restaurants had A or B scores. So it raised the bar within the industry. It improved public health outcomes, and it saved lives, and that's sort of why we really picked the name LIVES. The other inspiration for this was Google, and Google about 7-8 years ago created what was known as the General Transit Feed Specification, GTFS. And the history of that, I promise probably everybody in this room, whether knowingly or not, has used GTFS in some way. The history of their project was basically a Google engineer in his 20% time, which is the time that Google gives its employees to just kind of goof off and work on special projects a day a week, was looking at the Google Maps product, which is a ubiquitous, really helpful Google tool, and said, gosh, I love the ability to get from point A to point to point B on this map, but wouldn't it be great if I could see how to get there with a subway or a bus? I can open up the government's website, and I can sort of cull this information and try to figure out how to make the two work together manually, but really the two systems weren't talking to each other. And so this engineer, I guess, was from Portland. He reached out to the Portland city government and sat down with the biggest computer geek in the Portland city government and said, hey, how do we get our systems to talk to each other? And thus sort of emerged GTFS. And so today, GTFS serves over 400 cities across the U.S. I think it might actually serve Little Rock. I haven't done that. It does. You can do transit directions in cities like Little Rock because of GTFS, and because cities say, you know what, We're not going to build a mapping platform. We're not in the business of doing that. We're in the business of police, fire, roads, sidewalks. That's not really our forte. But Google is brilliant at building maps and putting together the resources necessary to build a really helpful consumer-facing map product. So all we have to do is really put our data in this specific way, host it on our servers, allow Google to draw from that, and suddenly our citizens have unlocked this amazing tool that promotes environmental best practices. It reduces the amount of the need for people to take their cars. It promotes public transportation. It's this really great win for the public good. So these two, both the LA study and GTFS, were major inspirations for the Lives project. So this is what it looks like on Yelp today. If you've ever been to a Yelp page, I don't know if this is a laser, but yeah. So you've got the business attributes here. This is Gary Danko, which is a nice restaurant in San Francisco. You can see there's an attribute now on San Francisco restaurant pages that says 92 out of 100. So when I click on that, it takes me to this page, and I can drill down and I can see, the last inspection. This represents a March 6th routine inspection, but I can look at and where they saw moderate risk of vermin infestation and other issues. I can drill down historically and look at then August 8th, they got a 96, and it was because of food holding temperature issue. And so as a citizen, I'm really empowered with this information, whereas it's very unlikely that I would have gone to San Francisco's portal that shares its information online and kind of waded through this clunky website, because frankly governments are pretty terrible at building beautiful web applications and websites. I can now go to this portal that I already used, and rather than it living on the storefront, which by then I would argue it's probably too late because you've already made your dining decision, this is happening in a context that's actually meaningful to the citizen. It's happening when this person's making their dining decision. And so I know that Gary Danko got 92 out of 100, has got a pretty solid reputation, and therefore I can make an informed decision based on this data that I subsidize as a citizen. It's a very powerful idea, and we're actually working with some academic institutions to study what the effect is going to be, basically a version 2.0 of the LA study that happened in the late 90s. So it's very exciting, and we're proud to be sort of a partner in this and provide leadership. An important thing about Lives, too, is that it's not just a Yelp thing. Like Foursquare, Google, any of these other restaurant review sites could take these Lives feeds and build it. That's one of the cool things about open data, is it really is just a platform agnostic. It's an open platform, so nothing stops others from coming and using this data. So we launched it in San Francisco at the US Conference of Mayors in January, and it took a couple months because it was our first city. We were learning a whole lot along the way. Within a few months, we said, gosh, we got to get another city online to be able to announce a follow-up at the July meeting of the US Conference of Mayors. And so I was working with the city of Austin, actually, to get them online, and at the last minute, the president of the Restaurant Association in Austin sort of called in a favor with the mayor and sort of derailed our press announcement. So we weren't able to announce Austin at the US Conference of Mayors. And so basically, 3 days before the conference, I was frantically scrambling, trying to find any city in the US who might be a great partner to get the data online, to really work with us. And I called the White House CTO's office, who had been sort of a quiet partner in all this. And they said, you should reach out to the city of Louisville. They've got a great sort of open data mandate. Their mayor is very forward thinking on this. And I thought, no way that Louisville is going to be a place that is this sort of forward thinking on technology issues. And sure enough, I called their CTO at 8 p.m. on like a Tuesday night and explained my crisis, and they said, yeah, let's do it. And by Friday, we had Louisville, we had sort of a beta version of Louisville's data online. Keeping in mind, it took about 2 months for us to do the same with San Francisco. That was really eye-opening for me, and it made me think about home a lot in Arkansas, that if a city like Louisville can be this pioneer and really tip of the spear and be basically the #1 city for open data initiatives, why can't Arkansas? Another cool story about Louisville is the mayor, Greg Fisher, who's really been kind of the visionary on this. He's done projects like mandating all inhalers prescribed in the city have a special chip that allows them to monitor the usage and time of day that the inhalers are used. And then they collect that data, they map it, they put it onto a map, and then they can understand trends in environmental health of are children who use inhalers at this specific time of the day that live near this coal plant, are they more likely to use this, and understand those types of impacts better. So doing some really powerful things with open data in Louisville. So again, I said, gosh, if Louisville can do this, why can't Arkansas? And so I did a little bit of research on what the state of Arkansas's open data, at least for restaurant inspections, looks like, and it's pretty grim. I did find some information for Fayetteville restaurants, but they're published by the paper. Somebody going down to City Hall, taking that information, and then pasting it and putting it into sort of an article format. It's not really in a database that I can search for a restaurant name. It's just sort of arbitrarily plopped into an HTML file, and that's that. And I couldn't find anything about Little Rock information online after a lot of searches. It may very well live online, but I after about a half hour of searching, gave up. There wasn't anything helpful in the Arkansas Department of Health site. They talked about how it's done, but Arkansas really has not yet taken even that step of taking the information that already does exist, because it does exist, and even putting it online in sort of a scanned image format. And so, there's a great opportunity here for municipal entities and counties and the state of Arkansas to follow the leadership of cities like New York and Louisville and San Francisco and Los Angeles, and really create open data portals for citizens and allow private platforms like Yelp to come in and say, hey, this information is useful to our users. There's an economic incentive for us to incorporate it. Another area that reminded me of this open data issue. Does anybody recognize this? Lindsay does. Does anybody recognize this? So this was the filing, I guess, that the blog Blue Hog Report pulled up for Lieutenant Governor Mark Darr and his recent financial scandal. I guess there's been a number of these. I try to pay loose attention to Arkansas politics, and this seems to be, there's been a couple fallouts and scandals over election monies and inappropriate use of campaign monies. And this is, somebody, I don't know if Blue Hog had to physically walk into City Hall and take this stuff and manually scan it, or if this is housed online, but either way, it's unacceptable. This was a filing that happened in 2011, so this scandal really should have been a scandal 2 years ago, but because we don't have strong open data policies within Arkansas, it really, we have to have this sort of where there's smoke, there's fire approach, and dig according to things that bubble up, as opposed to just transparency from the front end. So who knows what would have happened if we would have had this information way earlier? Or, a question I like to ponder is, would this even happen to begin with if we had stronger open data policies? If, for example, a candidate, when they filed their expenditures for their campaign, had to provide that in a digital machine-readable format that went online immediately, then organizations like the Arkansas Times and other media entities and citizens who just cared to peruse these sites would be able to identify this type of malfeasance right away, rather than it being this process of having to do a lot of deep digging. So that I think is, our current system incentivizes corruption. is what I'm trying to say. So that's the idea, is that whether it's Governor Beebe making an executive order or the state legislature getting the ball rolling on an open data initiative, creating some deadline. Is it 2014, to make sure that every major department in the state of Arkansas is providing open data, providing its data in a machine-readable format for citizens and others to ingest. And then the other idea would be to not schedule any future talks that I give during right as football kickoff is happening. But that's all I had. Thank you for coming out, and I guess we can open it up.
So, Luther, you mentioned the pushback that you got from Austin, from the restaurant lobby. This, I imagine, other excuses would be it costs too much, it's super laborious. Can you talk about how much time it takes, how much money it takes, and any other resistance that you've seen to this?
Sure. So, question is cost. Sort of, what is the cost to a government entity to sort of embrace open data, and then what type of obstacles have we seen along the way? Doing it city by city has admittedly been very difficult, because every city has sort of a different philosophy, and I think we've seen, in addition to sort of the external pressures to not do this, such as folks in the restaurant industry saying, oh my gosh, who are always going to resist this stuff being more conspicuous, even though in the long term it's actually probably very good for them, because it allows them, gives them another channel to compete. There are internal pressures as well. I was really surprised, one sort of conspicuously absent member of the Lives Project right now. We're going to get Los Angeles online within the next few weeks, which is huge, because it's the largest county in the United States. There's 10 million people in the Los Angeles County, and I think it's going to cause a lot of these other cities to really sit up in their chairs and say, wow, we need to sort of follow the lead. But New York, ironically, their technology people helped us come up with the idea, like some of the ideas for the standard, gave us example feeds and provided a lot of really helpful thought leadership as we were even developing this idea. And then whenever we were ready to sort of have them as a launch partner, they said, oh, we don't want to do it. And the reason is because by that time the Department of Health had been looped in, and they said, wait a minute, I'm not super comfortable with how in this particular column, whereas New York, the worst possible score you can get is a 1200. This column says that the worst possible score you can get is a 0. So there are, as part of open data standards and specifications, there is a requirement to do some normalization. I mean, that's part of the value of it, because you can do sort of inter-city comparisons, you can do intra-city comparisons, and in order to do that, we have to have every city sort of playing ball just a little bit and compromising and providing a column of information. What it is basically a column from 0 to 100. Can you boil down whatever the final score is to 0 to 100? And we'll display whatever you want, like New York displays ABC. But anyway, this little minuscule issue became the basis for New York not signing on to it yet. And they will. The political pressure will mount, especially after we have Los Angeles County online, and it's just a ridiculous policy for them to share this on their own website, to have this information required for restaurants to display on their storefronts, but to sort of pass when a platform where the information actually has important context asks for the information, that they decline to do it. So kind of beyond the pressures, kind of the external lobbyists of the restaurant industry, the internal entrenched thinking of departments of health who aren't necessarily on the same page as the technologists inside those cities. So it's been a challenge. As to the cost question, I mean, it really has, it's a cheap relatively cheap thing to do. I mean, most cities are not, most government entities that we've been working with are not like Arkansas, where it's not like this stuff is living in an image file online, or at least, or maybe it is. That's actually a good starting point, because then we can say, well, this isn't the best way for us to get the information. Can you all go through and convert this to a digital format? And then that's a great starting point for us. But to not have it online at all, like it appears is with the case with Little Rock, that makes it tough. But if we can get them to along the way, then it's very cheap. If it's living in some type of Excel format or database, structured data format, even if the data is not super high quality, we can go in and work with it and dedupe and clean it up, and we can kind of put some human resources on that. So we assume, I think, most of the cost in bringing that online, and as we should, because we're a private company, and this makes our service more valuable for our users. And another way that it's not free. I mean, you have to dedicate some work. A technologist within the city has to stop doing what they're doing and focus on kind of building it. But once that's done, it's effectively on autopilot. So I would say, a couple weeks of work from an individual within a city. And another thing that we've been seeing, and kind of one of the cool things that open data does, is it opens market. It creates new products. It allows entrepreneurs to identify, hey, I could build a product out of that. So you're seeing a lot of these companies don't manage their own data. They'll use sort of Axiom-like companies that specialize in city data and warehousing it, and they come and they say, hey, we've got so like Socrata is one of these, or Decade Software. There are these companies that work closely with municipal entities and say, hey, we can do the following stuff with your data. And so the creation of the Lives standard has allowed them to basically build a new product out of this and say, hey, cities, you can check this box and pay X more a month to what you're already paying, and we can provide this information so your stuff can get shared on sites like Yelp. And we're happy to work with partners like that, so long as they're not just gouging the cities, because that's not the point. The point isn't to kind of increase costs for the cities, but really to increase the visibility of this information.
Hey, Luther, great talk. I think open government data is a huge, huge market opportunity. But I was curious, other than health grades from cities and restaurants, like what other business cases is Yelp looking at incorporating government data?
Thanks for the tee up, because I think that I meant to mention that and I forgot. So this has been warmly received within the open data community and within governments for the most part. And so we've begun thinking, gosh, what's our next lives? And lately we've been focusing a lot on all this HHS data that's opened up. And so I now we're doing a big site reboot, but early next year, I think we'll be able to look forward to taking this. So HHS has patient quality scores. So if you're a recipient of any type of government aid, whether it's in Medicaid or Medicare dollars, you as a hospital have to do these, there's a mandate that you have to do these surveys of your patients and ask, what did you think about this? What did you think about this? And it's, 20-point scores in these patient quality surveys. Somebody's actually already gone in and analyzed those things and correlated them with Yelp reviews and said, hey, these are pretty good predictors of each other. So if you have a great Yelp rating as a hospital, typically your patient quality scores as done by the government are pretty good. But we're gonna pull that in. We're gonna augment Yelp information with this federal government data that came about as part of President Obama's mandate. And we're continuing to think and kind of brainstorm, like what other ways can we augment the service with government data. So I think, hospital scores, I think business license information is something we're also thinking about. So cities handle that in different ways, cities and states. But yeah, I mean, there really is so much potential in kind of on platforms that are consumer facing like Yelp to use that data in a really helpful way.
Thanks again. That is great talk. And going off of what he said, You know, we do rely on consumer reports, calling the Better Business Bureau, Angie's List, things like that also. But some things you said resonated with me too. Your sin breeds corruption, because we heard Lisa's song yesterday when we were trying to get information on the Exxon spill and how Exxon passes out documents with everything marked out. Also, our Arkansas Department of Health and our hospitals getting information on doctors and how those doctors rank, those types of things. So, power to you in your mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you very much.